we were talking about movement, and we were really in the middle of discussing the cerebral cortex and the different regions of those different motor regions that are involved when we make a movement. So I'm going to move forward in the frontal lobes here, and you can see the supplementary motor cortex being pointed to there in orange and the premotor cortex there in blue. I'm going to talk about each of those in turn. The supplementary motor cortex, both of those areas are active immediately before making a movement as part of that planning of the movement and processing the movement to send that information to the primary motor cortex to then send to the area of the spinal cord or the brainstem. The supplementary motor cortex, sometimes referred to as SMA for supplementary motor area, it organizes rapid sequence of movements in a specific order, and it is involved with these internally guided movements. So I usually use this example of, especially as I'm going to go back and forth here between the two, but of right now my my dance instructor is telling me to plie and then releve, and then I'm supposed to just go do that in this sort of internally guided way. I'm going to go and plie and releve. That plan is being created there in my supplementary motor cortex, that sequence of movements. It also helps us to inhibit habits. So your author uses the example of a left turn. I'm going to just go ahead and use my own example of the left turn on Bull Street, as I very normally go to the parking garage there, and so I make that left turn. But if instead of going to work today, I'm going up to the grocery store on Divine Street, I want to go straight, I have to inhibit that habit of turning left, and my supplementary motor cortex is going to do that. If I space out and I'm forgetting, and I actually do the turn left because I'm not really paying any attention to what I'm doing, that is the prefrontal cortex that's not paying attention. But if I was doing this appropriately, that would be the supplementary motor cortex that is inhibiting that habit. It's also involved with error correction, as when we make an error, it processes that so that we can not make that error in the future, and kind of inhibiting habits and errors when we need to. The premotor cortex is also active immediately before we make a movement. It is receiving information about the target, about body position, about posture, about all of these things that are going to help me direct my movement towards a particular target. That I have to be aware of all of those things to make the appropriate movement. And so, as this might sound, it's more dependent on externally guided movements. So if I'm following my dance instructor and he or she plies and releves and moves on, and I'm supposed to go to the same spot and plie and releve, and I'm following them, then I have a particular target, and the premotor cortex is more involved in that sequence of movements. The prefrontal cortex there in green is also involved in our processing of movements and our plans to move. It is active during a delay before a movement, as we in that working memory, we're storing that sensory information that is relevant for a particular movement that we want to make. And so sometimes they do this, having a monkey see something over to the right and then making that go away from their visual information, so they have to remember that information before, so that they can then decide to move over to the right. It considers the probable outcomes of possible movements, and it helps us to inhibit movements as well. As I already did, this kind of the spacing out and not inhibiting that movement was really the prefrontal cortex that was not paying attention to what I wanted to do. But I have a few examples. So one of my favorite examples is my very first classes, where I was teaching 3 classes at a time, and it was my first really morning classes instead of evening classes. And I had a really hard time that semester, and especially making my coffee in the morning, as apparently my prefrontal cortex hadn't yet woken up, and so I would make some stupid movement while making my coffee. And one time I remember being, I guess, so asleep at the level of the prefrontal cortex that I didn't put the carafe back in the coffee maker, And so coffee was just spilling out all over the counter. And I remember thinking, what's wrong with it today? So not really realizing that, gee, duh, you need to put the carafe in, because I was just that tired. And my prefrontal cortex was not helping me out. But I have another example. What's my other example of the prefrontal? Oh, the prefrontal cortex is not active, as we'll soon talk about wake and sleep cycles, that we are moving in our dreams, but our prefrontal cortex is being inhibited, so we make these, we don't really consider the probable outcomes of our different movements in our dreams, and we do things that seem very irrational when that prefrontal cortex is turned off or inhibited. So far we've been talking about brain regions, particular cortical regions that are involved with movement, our motor areas. And now I'm going to switch gears a little bit and talk about mirror neurons, or the mirror neuron system, which I'm going to a little bit assume that you've heard about these in a class here or there, because I talk about these in several classes. But this is a relatively recent discovery, maybe not, you don't feel so, but I do. It was either 1993 or 1996 that Rizzolatti and his colleagues discovered these neurons in the premotor cortex that respond the same whether you're performing a particular action or whether you watch someone else perform that action. And so this was actually one of those serendipitous results where they were recording from neurons in the premotor cortex and looking at monkeys performing a particular action. And one day the monkey was still hooked up and they were recording from a particular neuron or particular neurons, and the experimenter went and did the action. So the monkey was supposed to be, I think it was grabbing a peanut in this case, and what they ended up watching was the experimenter was grabbing the peanut, and the neuron fired. And so they realized this is a neuron that it's going to fire when the monkey's grasping the peanut, but it's also going to fire when the monkey's watching someone else perform that same action. So people got pretty excited about this, and why we have this mirror neuron system, or what this mirror neuron system is doing for us, is really still a matter of debate. So I have several pieces of evidence to walk through here that that I want you all to think about what you think this mirror neuron system is doing for us. And I have a few more things on this slide. So they've also shown that we have audio-visual mirror neurons, that the monkey watching someone grasp a peanut, the mirror neuron fired. There's one where they're cracking a peanut. If they see and hear the peanut cracking, the neurons fire. If they see the person crack the peanut, the mirror neurons fire. And if they just hear the peanut cracking, the mirror neurons fire. So there appear to be these audio-visual mirror neurons. And I think I'm going to leave it at that for today with that one, because I have another example, but I'm going to move on. And also, I just share here, so a really classic kind of seminal study from Meltzoff and Moore back in the 1970s, so 1977, well before any idea that mirror neurons, that this system existed. But I think this is in your textbook, that so they're showing the guy is going up and giving several faces to the baby, and the baby is imitating those faces, and they were doing this with several babies, and they were noticing that we had this tendency, even infants have a tendency to imitate. And so there's a question here because of whether this mirror neuron system is helping us with social learning, and so this is set up and helping the babies to do this, but we don't know at this point. It could be that the baby's imitating that is helping them to develop the mirror neuron system. So that's something to keep in mind. And I have a couple of links here. I'm not sure I always remember to put this first link up there. It used to be a great link from PBS, but it's gotten a little bit dated, and they've split it up on YouTube into several, maybe 2 or 3 episodes instead of just a single, here's what PBS put out originally. So I might end up putting that up. I might actually forget, but I'll definitely put up the TED Talk from V.S. Ramachandran. And so I'll leave time here tonight. It's a good idea, I think, to pause this now and go watch that TED Talk. So that's available in Blackboard, and or if you're in the PowerPoint, the voiced over PowerPoints, you can just go and watch that TED Talk. So it's a good idea to go do that now. If you end up waiting, it's fine too. But he has particular opinions about what this mirror neuron system is doing for us. So one of the laboratories is Pierno's laboratory, and Pierno et al. 2006 is the study that I'm going to share, where they talk about it at the mirror neuron system as an action observation system, where the neurons in the premotor cortex are firing in response to what they're saying. It's another person's intentions of a particular movement or what they're going to do. In this case, in the example, it's the intention to grasp an object. So there was a video, and in the picture I saw of it, there was a female animated character, and she's looking straight forward, and there's I think there's two little tables, and on the right, let's say, there's an object, and in one condition she goes to grab the object. In another condition, she just looks over at the object. And the assumption here is so that there could be this intention to go to grab the object, and in the third condition she just stays looking straight forward and there's no real movement. And from where they were recording, there was a mirror neuron response to whether the woman went to actually grasp the object or whether she even just went and looked over at the object. So the assumption here was that part of what mirror neurons are helping us to do is to consider the intentions of another person as they are moving throughout the world. Denstein et al. In 2010 is just one of the groups of researchers that have found normal mirror neuron system responses in autistic people and in schizophrenics. So I have heard several people talk about the broken mirror neuron system in autism. That is one of the things in that first YouTube video that I have that I'm not requiring. It's kind of older, and he talks about this as if this is what it. I'm pretty sure, if I remember correctly, he's talking about it as if autistic people do not have a working mirror neuron system. But more and more research is suggesting that they have normal mirror neuron responses. I've heard of this about potentially schizophrenics. So people who are having difficulty with that kind of theory of mind and that ability to take the perspective and make some theories about what somebody else is thinking or doing. I've also heard people talk about potentially people with depression having broken mirror neuron systems, but we're not finding this in any of these groups. There's also a neat study by Katmer et al. In 2007 where they had people watching someone, and so they have their hands together and they move the index finger, and the person's supposed to move their index finger. Okay, and then they had the person, they're watching someone else move their index finger, and in response to that, I'm supposed to move my pinky finger instead. Okay, so I'm having a different response, and it means the movement of my pinky finger. And what they found was that the mirror neurons turned into what they called counter mirror neurons, as those mirror neurons were changing in response to what my response to this person is going to be. So at least some of the mirror neurons developed their responses to learning that that person moving their index finger means my response is to move my pinky finger. So whether this is just figuring out other people's intentions, or to some extent figuring out other people's intentions so that I know what my response is going to be, is another aspect or another way to think about that. Okay, I'm going to stop there. I am out of time. I'm just going to stop right there. So I'm going to describe a study conducted by Beatriz Calvo Moreno, can't really say her name very well, back in 2005, where she had people watch capoeira dancing, which I'm showing down there on the left. I just got these pictures off of the internet, but what I'm trying to show with them is that it has these martial arts aspects to the dancing. And participants also watched ballet, so being shown down on the bottom right. And then the people who were participants were, some were capoeira dancers that didn't dance ballet, some were ballet dancers that didn't dance capoeira, and some were not dancers. Okay, so these are the results from the Calvo Moreno study, where she was examining activity in the premotor cortex, where those mirror neurons were originally discovered. And if you look at the red bars on this figure, you can see that if they were watching ballet, okay, the ballet dancers had a higher percent signal change than the capoeira dancers or the control, significantly higher. If we look at the blue bars, that is the response to watching capoeira dancing. And the capoeira dancers now have the most signal change and significantly more than the ballet dancers or the controls. And my memory is that ballet dancers watching capoeira, capoeira dancers watching ballet, and controls that do not dance, that those are not, none of those are significantly different from each other. So her conclusion was that these mirror neurons are shaped by experience. So I usually have my green question here, and this is, sometimes it generates some discussion, and sometimes I get a little bit of silence, but I do want you to stop and think, and you might want to pause it, although I'm going to leave that silence in there for you to think for at least a moment about what are these mirror neurons responding to. We've looked at several different studies, whether it was looking at intentions or the that kind of action observation system, that idea, watching somebody perform something that I perform, those audio-visual mirror neurons when we're listening to the peanut crack or the piano. So all of that. And then also, not only what are they responding to, since we're seeing them respond to these various scenarios, but what is their purpose for us? And we might say it for other animals as well, since these were discovered in monkeys. Okay, so when students are engaged and really interested in this question, they gravitate towards different answers. And a lot of people say social learning, this idea that we can learn vicariously by watching someone else. Some people feel pretty strongly about that idea of their being involved in our sense of empathy and feeling for other people. And other people talk about the importance of figuring out other people's intentions and our kind of response, how we respond. So this really kind of social, being able to handle our social situations. And I think, so I'm kind of hoping that my pauses here are places where you're thinking about this yourself a little bit, and I hope you did pause it, and that you did watch the Ramachandran, because he's clearly feels that this has to do with, the sophisticated mirror neuron system has to do with our sense of empathy, and potentially hinting on that theory of mind. But one of the reasons I pause here is that I think this is one of those areas that show what an open field a lot of this research is. That it's very exciting that just like back when Hubel and Wiesel discovered those simple cells and complex cells, people got very excited about what these meant for putting together visual information. As back then we used to talk about these really feature-driven theories because they had discovered these feature detectors. So we're in the middle of that excitement now with mirror neurons. We're not, the researchers aren't sure. We don't know exactly what their purpose is, or and we're finding they're responding to various aspects of watching other people perform these activities. So I think it's a kind of fun thing to think about, kind of like the question of the social pain and how much is that overlapping with physical pain, because it is something that they are still trying to figure out. I always think that's really exciting.